Hello everyone, and welcome to today's Dynamics 365 Tech Talk, where today's topic is using the Power Platform to extend finance and operations apps, Part 5, Power Apps and Canvas Apps. My name is Evan, and I'll be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this web conference through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your device speakers. Today's web conference is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation, and by participating in the session using Microsoft Teams, your name, email address, phone number, and/or title may be viewable by other session participants. If you do not consent to being a part of a recorded session, please disconnect at this time. The recording will be available on the Tech Talks Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located at the right side of your screen. Our presenters will be responding to your questions throughout and at the end of the event. Thank you for your patience during these announcements. Now let's get started. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Rachel Profitt, Senior Program Manager, and Jason Green, Senior Program Manager. Rachel, over to you.
Thanks, Evan, and thank you everyone for joining us today for part 5 of our series focusing in on the Power Platform. I do have to say this is probably one of my most favorite parts in the series that I've been looking most forward to, and I'm excited to share with you today. Again, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Rachel Profitt. I've got my contact information up here on the screen. I do invite you to follow me on Twitter, connect with me on LinkedIn, or check out my blog at dynamics365lady.com. So in today's session, we're really going to be focusing in on just the Canvas apps portion of Power Apps. In the next part of our series, in about 2 weeks, we'll be looking more at the model-driven apps side of things. But we're really going to be focusing in on use cases that are specific to finance and operations. And then we're going to demonstrate, actually, I think we have about 5 different demos lined up for showing you how to actually embed your Canvas apps into finance and operations. And then we're also going to show an example of how you can pass and consume data in your Power Apps. We'll review the do's and don'ts as well for using Canvas apps with your finance and operations. And it's important to note that we're not going to be covering the detailed aspects of licensing in today's session or model-driven apps or Power Apps portals, which are the next 2 sessions in the series. And I do invite you to get registered for those sessions if that's what you're interested in learning about. So taking a look at the overall agenda of what we're going to look at, we're going to start with some use cases, and then I'm going to show you some basics of getting started with Power Apps, specifically on the Canvas app sides. Then we're going to do a number of demos on how to embed and then how to pass data. And then we're going to talk a little bit about those do's and don'ts, provide a couple tips and tricks, and we'll wrap up with some a checklist and some resources for you to get started on your journey with Power Apps to extend your finance and operations. So getting started with our use cases, I'm just going to dive right in. There are 3 main ways that you can use Power Apps in finance and operations for embedding into a workspace. That's through a fast tab or launching it through a Power App. So we're actually going to show a couple variations on workspaces as well. So there's a couple different ways, but a couple examples of how you might use a Canvas app with finance and operations in a workspace. One example is an employee referral program, a customer onboarding and credit application program, or a quality order test result entry. When we think about embedding into a fast tab, these scenarios and examples are oftentimes more specific to a particular record. So an example here is we might show some manufacturing execution information for a specific production order, or you might show contract information that's related to a project. And in another example, we might use and show telephony information for a customer service dashboard. One of the examples you'll see later today that we embed into a fast tab is actually related to assets. So the new asset management module and the ability to see kind of some asset metrics that might be IoT data. So that's another great example that you could use a Canvas app for. The third way is that you can launch your Power Apps by using a button. Again, this is most typically going to be useful when it's specific to a particular record or a particular page in the system. So a few examples of how you might do this is through an IT help desk or case management app, or maybe you want to launch a separate employee or project feedback app. Another example is an app that a sales rep can use to capture information while they're out in the field. Keep in mind too that you can create Power Apps that are standalone and are not embedded into finance and operations, but that use your finance and operations data, or that maybe it's all new data and certain aspects of that data maybe go back and update finance and operations apps. So either of those scenarios are supported as well, but when we think about specifically embedding into finance and operations, these are the three key options. All of these scenarios could really be embedded in any of those techniques. You'll just want to think about that user experience and what makes the most sense for your particular example. So in this example here that you see on the right-hand side, we're showing a new product setup application, and this is being launched through a button. So this app was designed to use an external database and has an easy way to look up prices and discounts. We're getting some basic details from finance and operations, and once that kind of product is created, we actually go in and insert that product into finance and operations. And in this particular application, right, as soon as that new product is created, they can actually start entering that on a sales order. So where they access this button to create this new product is from the sales order form, they can open up that dialog to insert these new products very quickly and easily. And that's a great example of how you might use a Power App inside of the system. In our next example, this is the AP invoice automation example, and there's quite a few components that make this all work. You'll be seeing this particular app embedded quite a few ways, and we actually shared this app. It's available on GitHub in one of our previous sessions, but the link is on this slide as well if you're interested in downloading this app and trying it out and embedding it into your environment. But it receives emails through Power Automate and uses the form recognizer on the AI builder. And then there's quite a few pages that have been developed in this app. And here you can see it was embedded as a workspace. So it's like a full page app inside of the system. You're going to see this app a little bit later on embedded quite a few different ways, and we'll show you the actual technique that's used to embed it in these different techniques. So now you're seeing it as a tab in an existing workspace. And we'll also see an example a little bit later on where you can embed it as a button. So I want to kind of dive into the aspects of how to get started with Power Apps. If you've never built a Canvas app before, it's a pretty simple process, and I'm going to start with a very simple demonstration. So I'm here in the Maker portal, and to create that app, you're going to click on New App. Then you need to choose a template. So in my case, I'm just choosing that I want to start from blank, and I'm selecting the environment and the data source. So for my example, I chose the quality order line test results. And you'll notice that it creates 3 pages for you automatically: a browse, a detail, and an edit screen. And then I'm going through and doing some basics to just kind of update the headers. By default, when you create new pages, it uses the name of your entity, which doesn't include spaces. So you might want to clean that up a little bit. Then I'm actually cleaning up my gallery. So it selected 3 fields by default for my gallery, and I wanted to update those to use better fields and have it in a better sequence. Then you can see here what I'm doing is I'm actually adding some formulas and tweaking this so that each of my fields in the gallery has a label. So I'm just using quotes and typing in some static text for the quality order, the test description, and now the test result status. And then I use the AND function to combine that with the original field. Then I'm going into the detail screen, and I'm making some changes there. So again, the system automatically selected a series of fields. And if I don't like those fields, I can use that edit fields link on the right-hand side to very quickly and easily add or remove fields. And I can also rearrange those fields. So you can see me, I'm just marking some check boxes and adding some additional fields, and I can rearrange those fields as well. And I basically repeat that process for my detail and my edit screen. You'll also notice that the system automatically inserted some buttons on my form. And when you're done making changes to the form, you will want to test your app, which you can do using the play icon in the upper right-hand corner. Test out all the different features. And then when you're done, you're going to save it. So you'll need to name it. And after you've named your app, you'll want to share it. In my case, I'm sharing it with everyone in my organization, but obviously, depending on the nature of your application, you might want to share it with specific users or your own Azure Active Directory group or Office 365 group. So that's just the very basics of creating an app. This app, like I said, was a quality test, so it makes a very simple user interface for users to enter the test results related to quality orders that are in finance and operations. So if you've never built a Power App before, there are a number of resources that you can use to help you get started with all of the basics. There's a ton of learning. These 6 links are by no means exhaustive, but if it's your first time or you're just getting started, these are the links that I would suggest that you use to help you get started. You can sign up for a free trial using the link on the right, and then there's a bunch of learning, blogs, and documentation to help you get started. The bottom link for Plan a Power Apps project is another great link. So if you've got an idea for your organization, there's some guidance on how you can kind of plan that project for your organization. Now, once you've got an app, there's kind of 3 key concepts that you'll need to become familiar with: galleries, forms, and cards. Now, in my demonstration that you just saw a second ago, we saw examples of all of these. My browse screen included a gallery, and you can change that gallery layout. I kept the default, which was actually the title, subtitle, and body option that was used in the example you just saw. But if you want to customize a gallery, there's a great tutorial, and I've provided a link here on how to do that. Forms are another key component. So each one of the pages in your application might include 1 or more forms, and the forms are used to either view or edit a single record. So in my case, when I created the app, I got 2 additional pages, one that was the details and one was the edit screen. Both of those pages were very similar and included basically the same fields. The only difference was one of them was set to be a view only form and the other was set to be editable. Again, when you're working with forms, you can very quickly and easily add fields. You just need to select the data source that you're going to be using. Then you use the Edit Fields button, which you saw in that previous demonstration. There are a lot of other advanced functions that you can do with forms, and so I encourage you to check out this tutorial on how to customize a form. The third component that I want to talk a little bit about here is cards. And so cards are all of the elements or building blocks within a form. So each individual field inside of a form is a card. And each one of these cards has a variety of different properties. And many of these properties will be locked. And so you'll see the little lock symbol that's highlighted in red here. If you want to make changes to those properties, then you have to unlock that card by using the unlock to change properties button at the top of that card. If you're on the options tab, there's a lot of different properties that you can control: the size, the color, the basic appearance, and so on. But keep in mind, it is like a WYSIWYG editor, so you can drag and drop and make things larger and smaller, or use the toolbar up at the top of the page to select colors and things like that. But if you want to be a little bit more precise, the properties pane is a great way to do that. Again, if you're just getting started, I do suggest that you check out and follow this Customize a Card tutorial, which gives you and walks you through a lot of those basics around customizing cards. Now, after you've got cards, you can start to configure your Canvas app with formulas that not only calculate values and perform other tasks, much like they do in Excel, but they can also respond to user input, as your Canvas app might require. So in Excel, you build formulas that, for example, populate cells and create tables and charts. In Power Apps, you're going to build similar formulas using that formula bar up at the top, but instead of controlling cells, you're controlling, those different cards and elements in your app. So for example, you might build a formula to determine how your app responds when a user selects a button or adjusts a slider or puts in other input into a particular editable field. These formulas might show a different screen or update a data source that's external to your application. Or you could even create a table that contains a subset of data. You can use formulas for a wide variety of scenarios. So another example is you might use your device's GPS, a map control, and then add a formula that uses the location's latitude and longitude on your device to display your current location. And as you move, the map automatically tracks your location. These types of things would be very difficult with native web development, but when you're using Power Apps, a lot of these things are very simple. So this example here, and I do want to introduce you all to my friend Pico here that's doing the demonstration, shows you how easy it is to add a camera control. So in this example, we've inserted a camera control by using the Insert Media button. And then if it's the first time you're doing it, you'll need to allow access to your camera. And then once you've allowed access, the second thing I do here is I insert an image control. So you can actually see the image that we capture with the camera. And so when you select that image, you can see that I'm updating the property here to be equal to the camera, whatever the camera's name is, .photo. If it's the first time you're adding it, it's camera 1. I did this demo 5 times before Pico was really behaving well, so it's actually camera 5 .photo in my example. But to test your application, you can press Alt on your keyboard, and in my case, to test that camera control, I just press Alt and then click anywhere on the camera control. You could also add a button into your application to press the camera control if you don't want users to actually click on the actual camera control itself. So some practical applications of how you might use this. One is to, with my quality control example, is you might create a custom data entity in Dynamics 365 that allows us to store those quality order test results from document handling. There's not a data entity out of the box, so that would require some X++ development. Then once I have a data entity, I could bind my image control to that data entity and actually attach those images that are captured in the application to the related quality order in the system. So that's a great example of how you might use that. There's a link down here at the bottom as well that goes to the camera control reference where you can learn a little bit more about other things that you can do with the camera control in your applications. Now, another more advanced thing that you can do with your Power Apps is insert some mixed reality components. So Power Apps is one of the first low-code, no-code platforms that makes it possible for everyone to build mixed reality applications. I don't have any mixed reality technical development skills, but I can do this very quickly and easily. You might be familiar with Dynamics 365 Remote Assist and guides, which we do have sessions later on in our series that will focus in more on those features. While a lot of organizations are investing heavily in building like bespoke mixed reality applications, they oftentimes require people to hire lots of developers and technical resources. So now with Power Apps, we can just use the drag and drop capabilities to develop these controls and put 3D models and some mixed reality components right into your app. And again, I do encourage you to join us in part 10 of the series where we're going to dive into the mixed reality components, but it's important to kind of keep your mind open to that from a Power App standpoint. And there's a great link down here on how to actually, in a tutorial, how to add those mixed reality components to your Power Apps. Now, the next thing, and this is probably a very common thing that you might do in your Power Apps, is to insert flow buttons or Power Automate buttons. So to do this, you'll click on the Insert button. In my example here, I'm just using the Send Approval and Follow Up with an email template. So it populates that template for me automatically. I don't need to do anything. And then I can close that down and come back to my Power App and insert it. So you just click that action button and then insert it. Now, this particular Power Automate flow requires 2 parameters to be passed in, and you can actually see in the example here that I'm passing in a formula. So I'm actually using the current user.email to pass in whatever the current username is, and I'm also then submitting my form, which is called Edit Form 1. And then I navigate back to the browse form. So after you click that single button for the check mark to say you want to save it, it updates the record. It executes my flow. So if I come over into Power Automate, you can actually see my flow. So if we open that up, you can see the flow running, and I would approve that flow just like I would any other flow. And you could see the details in there, drill down into it, and so on. And in my case, the condition is configured to send an email, whether it's approved or rejected. It just says if it's approved, send this email, and if it's rejected, send a slightly different email. Some practical applications of how you might use flow buttons in your applications are to send and wait for an approval, just like you saw me do in this quality application. But you might also use them to do CRUD operations in external applications. And that could include CRUD operations in finance and operation apps as well. So if you need to create, read, update, or delete a record in another system, you can use your Power App to do that. You can also use your Power App to execute validation or business logic. So you can build a flow that has conditions and validations and just returns true or false values. It is possible to pass values back from a flow button. So if you need to write some business logic, you can do that very quickly and easily by using a flow button. You can also automate a process. So especially using the RPA, we talked about UI flows in our last example. You might be able to automate and make this a flow button in your app do some business process automatically for you without user interaction. Now, the next thing example that I want to talk about is how you can bring AI into your apps with AI Builder. So you can access the AI Builder from the navigation pane within the Power Apps Studio or from the Microsoft Flow website. It opens up a simple wizard-like experience that's been tailored to kind of empower non-technical folks like myself to keep with the kind of basic strategy of Power Apps and the Power Platform. So you can access all of your AI models in a single pane under the AI Builder Models tab. So you can see that over on the left-hand pane there, and I'm on the Build tab. And I can refine a model, meaning like create my own model for category classification, form processing, object detection, prediction, or entity extraction. Or using the links on the bottom underneath the Get Straight to Productivity, there's a variety of pre-built AI scenarios that you can see listed out here on the left-hand side. So a couple of those are newer and are still in preview, including the receipt processing and the category classification. I encourage you to join us. I believe it's part 11 of the series where we're going to dive in. It might be 9. We're going to dive into AI Builder in a lot more detail. But if this is something that interests you, keep in mind that it's very easy to add AI components into your applications. The AP invoice automation example that we talked about, and you're going to keep seeing a few more examples with that from an embedding standpoint, is a great example of an app that uses that AI Builder. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Jason, who's going to do some demos for us and talk a little bit about how to embed your Power Apps into finance and operations.
Thanks, Rachel. So I'm Jason Green. I'm the program manager for the F&O web client, which includes personalization, which is a lot of what we're going to show you over the next few minutes. So if we'll go ahead and jump in, for the very first example, what we're going to look at is a way to embed a Power App as a new page on your dashboard. So you have lots of workspaces on here already, but you can add a new tile onto this to add a full page Power App. And this is under the full page apps feature in feature management, which is currently in preview. So if you click that add a page, you'll see the options for a workspace, a Power App, or a website. If you choose Power Apps here, you can pick whatever name that you want. So this will correspond to the name that you see on the tile on the dashboard. So in this case, we're going to pick processing automation. You'll grab your app ID from the settings in the Power Apps portal itself. So you'll want to copy that in. And then we'll paste this into this field, and that's all you have to do. So once you hit OK, your dashboard will reload, and you will see a new tile on the dashboard that is linked to this Power App that you just added. And if you click into that, you're going to get a full page, so full height, full width experience with this embedded Power App that works, looks native to the application. So this is the first way that you can do this. So the next few examples are going to also go through personalization, where you're going to be adding a Power App, in this case, into a workspace. So in most of these, we're going to start out by opening the personalization toolbar and using that add an app option. And so from here, what you want to do is you want to basically pick the container that you want to add a new section to. So in this case, we picked the container around the panoramas. This opens a dialog with to add a Power App, but you'll notice there's some more options in this case. We have the same name and app ID that we had before, and so we're going to fill those in just like we did. So AP invoice automation, again, we're going to grab the app ID from the settings page for your Power App. There's also the ability to pass context to your app. So if you want to pass information from F&O into the app, and we'll talk more about that later. There's an application size. So the recommendation here is if you built this as a tablet app, you'll want to use that wide option. And if you built it as a mobile app, you'll want to use the thin option. And so you can see what happens after this comes in. There's a new section on your workspace where this new Power App shows up. And you can use personalization, the move tool, to rearrange these in the order that you want. If we move on to the third example, this one is also very similar. Instead of adding a Power App as a panorama section, we want to add a new tab to the top of this form as a new Power App. And so the process is going to be very similar. So again, we're going to go in, open up the personalization toolbar. You can go in through these right-click options. There's also the Control-Shift-P that gets you directly into this mode directly. And it's the same thing. You go to the ... click Add an App, and this time instead of selecting the region around the panoramas, you're going to pick the container around the tab controls. And again, the process from here on out, it's all going to look exactly the same. So the same name, the same app ID. If you want to pass context in, you can choose a field for that. Pick your size. If you want to give this to users in a certain legal entity, you have all those options whenever you embed. So we embed this one. You can see we have a new app or a new tab page, new pivot tab that also shows this with lots of space for the new Power App. All right, continuing to move on. So we've gone past workspaces. Now we're going to start moving into how you embed these into forms. And there's two ways that you can do this. The first way is through the Power Apps button in the top right corner of the screen. So if you noticed, you clicked on that button and hit Add an App. And again, you're going to see this very familiar dialog where you're going to fill in the same kinds of details. And what's going to happen when you do this is that it's going to launch that Power App in a dialog on the form. And so these are going to be more appropriate when you want to link your Power App to the specific record that you're looking at. So in this case, for this vendor invoice. Once you've added it, especially if you have save views enabled, you'll want to save those changes. You would have seen that asterisk show up that said that view was unchanged. If you don't save it and you come back to the form, you're probably going to lose your setup. But if you save it, you can open the dialog. As we said, this was a wide Power App. And then you'll obviously want to share that, and we'll look at how you share that in a few minutes as well. And moving on to one more example. So maybe you don't want to add it as a dialog and you want to add it directly as a new fast tab into this form. Again, same process, open the personalization toolbar, click add an app. You're going to select the region around the fast tabs. And you're going to, again, pick Power Apps and go through the same process where you're adding the same information. So the nice thing about all these setups is once you've done this once, you can basically replicate this process in whatever forms, whichever method feels right for the situation to embed this Power App. And again, we're going to save it to the view. And then this one just pops up as a fast tab. You can expand, collapse that, reorder that just like you can with any of the other personalization tools. So that's a quick run through of about 5 ways that you can embed a Power App into the system. I think from here, we're going to move forward and talk about sharing. So once you've embedded a Power App with personalization, it's going to be important that you actually distribute this out to the users that need to use it. And so the example we're going to look at here is with this adding a page to the dashboard. So we're going to use this publish page. You're going to right click, hit personalize, and click publish page. And so this functionality lets you distribute this this new tile out to all the users in 1 or more security roles. And so you can type here, you can pick as many as you want. The checkbox to the right lets you, if you have a hierarchy of security roles set up, you can actually cascade that selection down to all of the sub roles as well. So once you click publish, it's basically there. You don't have to target individual users. And so just to prove that to you, we're going to come over to this user, April, who is an accounts payable clerk. You'll notice on the dashboard that Power App is not there. Once we refresh, that tile automatically shows up without the administrator having to do anything, right? This automatically gets deployed out as soon as that user gets a role and they come to the dashboard. They'll see these personalizations show up for them. You can do the same thing. So the same publish experience is available if you're on other pages with save view support. So we saw in that vendor invoices form, you can also take those views that you've saved and publish those out to users as well. If you happen to be on a form that does not support save views yet, which would be workspaces, you will have to apply those personalizations individually to users, either through exporting and importing users or going through the apply option in the admin personalization form. And so switching gears one last time. So all the things we've done so far have talked about embedding Power Apps via personalization. You also have the option to embed a Canvas app using Visual Studio and the developer experience through the AOT. So in the example here, you can have a form that you've modeled and you simply have to add a Power Apps host control to the form. And then in the properties pane in Visual Studio, you'll notice the same types of properties that you would have seen when you were filling out that dialog with personalization, where you fill in the app ID. There are fields if you want to set a context control that you want to pass context from, or if you just want to link that directly to a data source data field combination. So that option is also available if you want to embed this directly in your application, not using personalization. All right, so that's a whirlwind through a number of ways to embed the Power App into F&O. So now we're going to switch gears and look at how data gets passed between Power Apps and F&O. And so with that, we're going to also dive into another demo. So in this example, we're going to look in the details about how context is passed from a Canvas app into finance and operations. And so we're going to start with this Canvas app, which this is an asset metrics app that has a gallery that you can see now where you're trying to find the asset that you're interested in. And then once you drill in, it's going to show some metrics about that asset that might have come from a IoT or somewhere else. And so if we look at this, and if you could pause right now, Rachel. So if we look at this formula on this timer control in the Power App, this is where the magic is for how this works. So in particular, if you look at that entity ID param, so what this is a URL parameter that is, and this is the context that's passed into the Power App. So in this particular example, we're basically saying, does this URL parameter exist? If it does, we're going to bypass the gallery and go directly to the detail screen, and we're going to look up the asset that's associated with that value. Otherwise, we're going to stay on the gallery itself. All right, you can continue now. And so as we switch over, you'll notice we're looking at this detailed screen, and you can see up in the URL that we do have that entity ID equals FL-01. So because that's there, it's drilling directly into that, that metric screen. And so how this works from the F&O side is, and we're going to embed this app twice just so you can kind of see how this works. So we're going to embed this app directly into F&O. So here we are, the Asset Metrics app. We're going to grab that app ID just like we have before from the settings screen. And the first time we embed this, we're just going to not pass any context. And so once we insert this, this is going to open up the dialog. And you're going to notice this is going to come up again with that gallery. So it's not really linked to this record that I'm looking at in the UI right now. And I'm going to have to filter or scroll through this data to find the record that I want. And then I drill in to find the metrics associated with the record that I'm looking at in F&O. Now, if I do this again, except this time I'm going to actually set some input context. So again, we're going to put the name in. We're going to add the app ID. And this time we're going to pick a field from the F&O form that we want to send as context. And so we're going to send that asset field. And what's going to happen whenever we do that is we're going to pass the value from that control for that record in the URL that we use to initialize the app. And so once this comes up, that entity ID parameter is going to be populated, and it's going to drill directly into the record that we want, so we don't have to go through that list. So this allows you to build a Power App that uses the context from F&O to really enhance your form and bring in capabilities that you embedded in your Power App. All right, do's and don'ts. So let's go ahead and review some of the stuff that we recommend that you do and do not do with your Canvas apps with finance and operations. So the first do is that you will need to share your Power App inside of Power Apps with the users that you want to have access. They will not have access to it by default. You will have to manually share it with the users that need access. We do recommend that you are selective and that you do it to just the users that need it and not give it to everyone in general. So that's on the Power App side. Once you get to the F&O side, those users that need access to the Power App will also need the app shared with them through personalization or however you embed it in the system. This will not be as necessary if you go through the AOT, but if they are personalizations, you'll want to share those personalizations out through the users. And the recommendation is that you're going to publish them through views. That's always going to be the recommendations for distributing and deploying personalizations, because that gives you basically one record that you're responsible for that users just pick up instead of having to manually touch every single person. We also do not want you to use unmanaged or no solutions. If you're going to try to move these between environments, so again, the recommendation with the personalizations is because we're recommending you publish them, you can import and export the shared, they're called organization views that have the roles already attached. So you can export those from one environment and import them into the next one, and then republish them out, and then they'll just go back to all the users in those roles again. The last thing that we would recommend that you do is to make your app look like finance and operations. And so for the next couple of slides, we're going to talk about the ways that you can make simple little design choices in your Power App so that it looks more native once you embed it. So if we move on. So in this first demo, we're going to look at there we go. So the default Power Apps is to have that letterboxing on the side. So if the app doesn't exactly fit in the space in the dialog, you're going to get those gray bars on either side. There is an option that you can use to suppress that. And so if you go into your app settings, go down in experimental features, there's an option called optimize embedding appearance. And what this does is instead of centering the Power App, it's going to move it to the top left, and it's going to make the background white. And so once you do this, you're going to remember you want to save it. You're going to want to publish it so that it's live. And then again, once you come back to F&O, just to look at the difference, if you open this back up, this is the visual before you set the property where you have the letterboxing on the sides. Once you refresh and you open the app again, we're going to lose that letterboxing on the side. It's going to move it up into the top left, and it's going to have a white background. And this is going to feel a lot more native, a lot more natural in the product than the first example we gave. So the recommendation is going to be to turn on that optimize embedding experiences when you're embedding apps in F&O. The next thing that we want to talk about is using the colors, trying to make your app, your Canvas app look like F&O by replicating the default theme. And so this slide kind of shows the basic building blocks colored wise for how you might do this. So the recommendation is to use a white background for your app. You could also choose, some of the forms in F&O have a light gray background. That would be your other option, but white would be our first recommendation. And then these other colors are things that you can use just to make it look like F&O. So you'll want to use the Sego UI font. For your text color, it's not quite black, but it's a pretty dark gray. So if you want to try to match those types of things, you can use this blue for links and buttons. You can use some of these colors if you want to make your galleries kind of look like F&O as well. And so in the last example, we'll look at an app that tries to do some of these things. So in this example, you'll notice a few things. So we are choosing the Sego UI font. You'll notice that the group label, that new product details, looks like F&O. It's all caps. The fields have the lines underneath the bottom borders to simulate what view-only fields look like in F&O. The buttons probably should be changed in color a little bit, but if you look at this against F&O, this looks pretty native, and this is the kind of appearance that we want to go for whenever we embed applications. So with that, I think I'll hand it back over to Rachel for the checklist and resources.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jason. So what I want to do is kind of recap some of the things that we talked about. If you're not familiar with the application lifecycle management of Power Apps, I do strongly recommend that you check out this Tech Talk with the link that's here that walks through all the details of how to actually promote your applications through your dev, test, and prod environments. You'll want to make sure as well that you're procuring the correct licenses for whatever your scenario might be. And again, we're not going to go into the details, but you can check out the licensing guide, which has all the information about what licenses are required for Power Apps. We again do recommend that you create a solution, and preferably that you use a managed solution. You might start as an unmanaged solution in your development environment, but once you're ready to start promoting that through your test and production environments, we do recommend that that is a managed solution. So once you've got that solution, you can start building your Power Apps, and don't forget that you're going to need to test your Power App, just like you test any application changes that you make directly inside of finance and operations. Once you've gone through that testing process, it's important to remember that you'll need to share your app directly from inside of the Power Apps portal. And then you can start to embed that application in the finance and operations user interface. Everything that we showed you today as well applies to human resources, commerce, and project operations. So whether it doesn't really matter which one of the finance and operation apps that you're using, all the demos were done from finance and supply chain management, but it can all be done from any of the finance and operation apps. And remember that if you are using personalization and not making those changes to the AOT directly, you will need to share your personalization through publishing of those saved views. It's also important to remember that just like you need a cutover strategy for your finance and operations to migrate these things into production, you'll want to define a cutover strategy for your Power Apps, much in the same way. You might need to add some additional steps into your cutover checklist, and it's important to not forget to do these kind of little things. We've also compiled a variety of additional resources that you can use to help you get started with Power Apps. So this first page is specific to developing Power Apps. So on the Microsoft Docs website, there are 6 tracks and more than and hundreds of pages of documentation out there that I would encourage you to check out. If you're just getting started, the Learn site is a great place to get started. There are actually 22 different learning paths, 78 modules, and 4 different certifications that are all specific to Power Apps that you can use to get you started on your Power Apps journey. There's also a YouTube channel and more than 150 videos. They're constantly adding new videos along with 10 different playlists, depending on what your focus is on. And I do suggest that you subscribe and collaborate with the community with these videos, because there's a lot of great content out there to help you on your Power Apps learning journey. The second slide of resources that we've put together are all specific around the Power Platform. So the administration, the kind of application lifecycle management and so on with Power Platform components is different than with your finance and operations components. So it's important to remember that. I do encourage you to check out that Tech Talk that I had a link to earlier in the presentation. But these links here are specific to the admin content that is specific to Power Platform. Again, there's more than 20 sections and hundreds of pages. There's also a Center of Excellence starter kit that you can find and download a variety of resources in the Microsoft Docs site. Some of them will point you over to GitHub depending on what those files are. But if you're trying to get started with Power Platform and you're not sure how to kind of administer this across your users and give them access, starting with this Center of Excellence starter kit is a great way. This page kind of talks through all of the setup guidance to get started with the kit. It explains what's included and a lot of how-to guidance. And then the ALM is another key component. There are 5 sections and more than 50 pages, and it's all scenario based. So depending on exactly what you're trying to do and migrate, it's a great resource to help you with your ALM story related to Power Platform components. So with that, I think we're going to open it up for questions. We do have a number of questions in the queue that I think we want to try to go through and answer. So the first one that I see here is when selecting the Dynamics 365 Finance and Operation connector, you had to select the environment. Now, if I have to move from a dev to a sandbox, how do you change that link? And that's an excellent question. So this is actually all part of the application lifecycle management. When you're using solutions and you're exporting those, it will actually prompt you to select how you want it your connections to be handled. So some of your connections, let's say, for example, you had a connection to Outlook. That Outlook connector might still be the same between your dev and your test and your prod. However, the finance and operations connector is a great example. When you're moving that between environments, you would actually want to change it. So there's an option in the drop-down box where you can say select during import, and it will actually then prompt you to select the correct value when you're importing that or moving it into the next environment. If you're using build automation tools, there are parameters and properties that you can use to automatically pass those values in, so that a user doesn't have to be actively there selecting a value from the drop-down box when you do that promotion. Again, I do encourage you to check out those ALM resources along with that Tech Talk, because it'll provide some more specific guidance around that. The next question I see out here, if we need to create a purchase order Canvas app, what is the best way, use of form, connector with Power Automate or HTTPS logic app, given the 2 scenarios? One is with high volume and one is with low volume. So when you're thinking about creating a Canvas app, I wouldn't really compare a Canvas app to logic apps. I would compare logic apps to Power Automate flows. The Power App, you can think of that as the user interface component of your application of whatever you're developing. If you're expecting lots of users to be using this app and inserting lots of rows all at once, you'll want to carefully consider how you kind of design your Power App. But typically, these types of transactions are going to be single transactions at a time. Now, you can design Power Apps that perform poorly, where if you're storing everything in like a collection, for example, and then you're submitting it all at the end at once, and we're submitting lots and lots of records, you may run into issues with performance there. So you'll want to carefully consider kind of how you're submitting forms, how you're saving, how frequently you're updating that data back in. Obviously, if there's multiple pages and we need to collect enough information to be able to submit, you might need to use a collection, but I would advise you to try to keep your transaction blocks small, and it's only then however many users are using that Power App. And generally, like single calls through OData are fine. If you have extremely high volumes or extremely high numbers of users, you may want to consider saving that data into like common data service entities, more like a staging table, if you will, and then using something like a logic app to move that data more in bulk, and then it becomes a little bit more asynchronous. So hopefully that answers the question. I know it's not an exact answer, but you'll need to kind of consider carefully based on your situation. I don't know, Jason, if you have anything you want to add for that one.
Nope, I think you covered it.
Okay. So someone asked a question, how do you share the Power App with the right people if you're going to publish it to anyone who has a certain role? I think I understand this question. So keeping in mind that there's two different aspects to the sharing. You have to share the Power App directly from the Power Apps portal. And then if you're embedding it through personalization, you also have to share the saved view, or publish that saved view. Now, in Power Apps, we don't have the security roles that are inside of finance and operations available to us. You do, however, have the Office 365 or Azure Active Directory groups that you define in the Microsoft 365 portal or directly in Azure Active Directory. So those groups, if you're trying to share these Power Apps with specific security roles, you might want to consider creating a group in your Office 365 that is the same as your group, as your security role in finance and operations. So you're sharing it with the same Office 365 group and then the same security role. There is additional functionality that you could consider using, right, as well, to kind of automate the creation of the assignment of those security roles based on the Azure Active Directory groups if you were to set your AAD groups up to match those roles. So hopefully that answers the question. If not, feel free to kind of respond back in and we'll try to get that question answered. Okay.
There's another question. Is it possible to call X++ logic classes from Power Apps? I'm assuming we can with OData actions and functions.
Yes, so the assumption is correct. You can call OData actions from a Power App. So you would do that by adding in a flow button. So, the user would have to do something to execute that flow, right? Click a button. And that Power Automate can then call an OData action. But you can't call X++ directly, so to speak. It has to be through an OData action. So we had another question that came in. Is it possible to pass context of multiple records? For example, a user can filter a list of products in FinApps via an advanced query and then take that list for further enrichment in Power Apps as opposed to doing it one record at a time. I think the answer to that, and Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, is unfortunately that is not a capability of the Power Apps control at this point. And it's only capable of passing one value. So even if you needed to, like if you wanted the asset number and the item number, you only have the ability to pass in one piece of data. What I typically recommend when you're passing data is to pass in like the unique identifier. And if you need to get additional pieces of data, like an item number or description or some other field as well as a part of your app, you can use you know, a connection to like join and get that data in your Power App. So there are functions that you can use to kind of join and get data from other data sources. But this particular example of passing multiple records, I don't know of a way to do that.
I mean, based on this example, the only thing I can think of is if the context you passed was enough to allow you to filter through the F&O connector to get multiple records on the other side, that might work. But being able to pass like multiple IDs, multiple record IDs through is not natively supported.
Okay. I think that might be all of the questions that we had. I had some that were published. Did we want to review any of those, Jason?
Sure, we can. So one of the questions was, do you have to share the Power App in the makerspace before you can publish it to the users on the F&O that have the role? And so, no, those are independent steps. So the security on either side can be done in either order. It just won't work on the F&O side until they're both done. So if you've given the F&O user the personalization has the embedded app, but they don't have access to it, when they try to load it, they will get a can't find this app message instead of the app actually loading. We already covered the if your single identity field isn't unique. Somebody asked.
I think let's call out your workaround though, because I think that's a good point for now.
Sure. So yeah, if you need multiple fields of context, so when we put this in originally, Power App's only allowed supporting one piece of context. So that's what we did. They have since expanded their support. So we need to do on our side a little bit more work to allow you to pick multiple context fields. But as a workaround, if you are in that developer scenario where you're adding a Power Apps host control, you could consider doing some data method where you combine, multiple pieces of multiple fields or maybe even multiple record IDs into one context, like a data method that encapsulates all of that, passing that through to the Power App, and then doing the parsing and dealing with that on the Power App side. So that is one potential workaround that you could do now, but that doesn't really work for the personalization avenues because you can't really construct that data method on the fly.
Okay. And then someone had also asked what platform update is the published page on Workspace, and the name of the feature is actually called Embed Full Page Apps, which is PU33. And it is dependent on saved views. So you do have to have saved views enabled too in order to use it.
Right. And that feature is targeted to be GA pretty soon. The piece that we have left is being able to publish to legal entities like you can with saved views. And once that's there, then we'll open that up for GA as well.
Great. So I think that wraps up all the questions that we had for today. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Evan to wrap us up and give you some information about the survey.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel. Like you said, we would like to get feedback on today's session. I've posted a link to a short survey in the Q&A panel. We value your feedback and welcome your input on how we did today and what you would like to see in future sessions. That survey scores on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score possible, and we thank you for your participation in that. As a reminder, the recording of today's session will be available on the TechTalk's Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenters and a thank you to our audience for logging in and joining us today. Please stay safe and have a great rest of your day or evening wherever you are. Goodbye.